I'm just going to stay positive and everything's going to work out fine. And the reality is, there's a high chance that you will get hit by a car tomorrow, you'll die.
Just be more optimistic. What's wrong with you, sad sack?
Regardless of how many backup plans you're going to have, you'll most likely think, okay, but there's always something worse that can happen. And I have to prepare for that.
So, Mariusz, we were thinking about positive and negative people. Maybe not so much positive and negative, but people who are a bit more. If there was a scale tipping from pessimism to optimism, I think it's fairly well established that I'm more on the pessimistic end of that scale, and you're more on the optimistic scale. I laughed about this before with you, and I told you about some furry characters from a program called Sesame Street. You weren't familiar with them, called Bert and Ernie. Some people are probably familiar with them, and I think I'm quite a Bert character, and you're a bit of an Ernie character, and those are extremes. Ernie's extremely optimistic, Bert's extremely pessimistic. So what are the pros and cons of being pessimistic or being optimistic? That's maybe what we can discuss today.
Well, pros and cons. I don't think that it's that simple. We can't really talk about it in terms of pros and cons. Clearly, the best way forward would be to stay positive, all our lives. But because by default, most of us are negative, it's a really, really tricky thing to do. So what are the positives or negatives? I don't think that we should talk about in these terms.
Okay.
I think
no, that's fair enough. Let's just talk about it. So, yeah. I'm going to pick up on what you said there. Most people are pessimistic, you said.
We've got a negative mindset.
Negative mindset, right, okay.
Most of the time, when we talk about things, when we predict things, our minds are designed to protect us, from making mistakes, from failure. And this is a defensive mechanism of some sort, of humans, because, the ability to anticipate the worst case scenario in the ancient times was a life or death for our ancestors. So I think that biologically it would seem like a really good idea for us to be more negative than positive, because anticipation of the worst case scenario will support your survival. Whereas if you're going to be overly optimistic, then you never know. And if you're going to be, let's say, when our early ancestors were walking on savannah, if they're to think about the world, it's going to be so great, there are no lions and there are no dangerous animals, I can just walk and hopefully everything's going to be fine, that would be a really horrible thing in terms of their survival. Whereas in today's society, I think that we still got this ancient mechanism that's, at work. But today's society, today's world is completely different. So I think perhaps this is part of a problem. Why?
Okay, well, can I push back a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely.
So, if that's the case, and that previously in history there was all these dangers, and so there was a value in being more pessimistic because you could possibly save your own life. Whereas now we live in a safer time, you're probably less likely to be eaten by a wild animal, certainly in the Western world. So by that reasoning, everybody would be much more optimistic now because there's less dangers. But they don't seem to be.
No,
so why are they potentially, you suggested that they're more pessimistic now. So why are they more pessimistic even though the dangers have reduced?
I think that part of it is a negative programming from the outside world, whether it's media, whether it's other people, and there's always something to be fearful of. So I think that's part of a reason. And it's not easy to change your mindset from negative to positive. You have to work on it. You have to work on it every day. And I don't think there's an easy solution for that. There's also probably some genetic aspect of it as well, because I do believe that by default, I'm more positive than negative. And I was blessed with these genes. And yes, the fact that I'm working hard on trying to maintain it as good as I can, I'm having a much easier time than some other people who, let's say, were predisposed to be depressed. But it doesn't mean that the people who are depressed can't change. We've talked about it earlier, and we're going to dive in more into that probably in an hour, either next week or in 2 weeks' time when it comes to the personality. But loads of these things are malleable, and they're up to us. We can decide. It's not easy. And especially if by default and if genetically you're more predisposed to be negative, you're going to have to put much more work into it.
Okay. There seems to be a slight contradiction in what you're saying, because if these things are malleable and you're predisposed and it's your genetics, that's not malleable. That's like...
Even though we're predisposed because of your genetics, doesn't mean that it's impossible to change. You're predisposed, you've got more of these negative genes. But I believe that, by working on it on a daily basis, by, providing yourself with evidence that, that help you to create that growth mindset, that positive mindset, over time, you can change. Despite of your genetics.
So you can overcome your disadvantage genetically. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, this is exactly what I'm saying.
Okay, fair enough, yeah. Yeah, that sounds reasonable.
And like I said, so my argument is that you can do it. Some people are going to have much harder time to do it than others. But I think that all of us have to work on it, because even if by default you're more positive than negative, if you're going to watch TV every single day, watching news and reading about all the horrible things that are happening in our lives, there's no way you're going to stay positive. We're so easily programmed by the information that we're being exposed to on a daily basis that we just have to realize that this is the case. And it's up to us to decide what sort of information we allow to come in from the outside. Because if you're not going to be careful, you're going to be living in that negative loop all your life.
So it sounds like you're saying it could be nature, it could be nurture. So nature is your genes. Nurture is your upbringing, different things. But nurture is also... But you're saying the solution lies in nurture, nurturing a positive mindset. Sounds like that's what you're saying. So nurture is the area where we can look for development, look to develop and improve things, and look to stop some of the negative nurture that we're maybe causing our lives. Is that the message? Is that what you're suggesting?
That's part of a message, yes, and you clearly understand what I'm saying. But it's not that simple. It's a combination of psychological aspects combined with the physical ones. So, as we've discussed earlier, sleep is a big one. You have to be rested to stay positive. If you're not rested properly, then you're going to be very edgy, and it's going to be really difficult to maintain a positive mindset. The other thing is the type of food that we eat every day has a huge impact on that as well. That will determine whether or not we're energized or if we're fatigued. So it's not that simple, just, change your mindset, everything's going to be fine, just bombard yourself with all the positive messages. No, it's more complex than that. But that's the first step. And clearly, implementing some positive habits in your life will ultimately lead to change in that personality, I believe. Because there were times in my life that I was quite negative, but after analyzing the reasons why I was so negative, you'd realize that there was many external factors that were at play at that time, but also internal, like a diet, horrible sleeping pattern, and the type of information I was absorbing every single day and living mindlessly, just allowing life to happen to me, rather than looking at the world, at life as it's happening for me. Or at least this is the story I'm telling myself.
Okay. So I guess maybe we've jumped ahead and we've already assumed that optimism's the winner of the argument between optimism and pessimism, which better. So let's reach... I feel like I'm having to put myself on the losing side because it's like I can't really see any way of winning.
Try to justify it, yeah.
Pessimism. Okay, so probably you're going to go down the realism route of what are the dangers. Maybe I'm going to argue. It's not an argument for, but it's more a look at why maybe some people might be more pessimistic on the nurture aspect. So on the nurture aspect is the things that they encounter in their lives, how they were nurtured into that mindset. So what are the dangers? Yeah, you're probably not going to be eaten by a wild animal. However, there's probably a high likelihood that you could be taken a loan of, that you could be victimised, be the object of bullying for other people, that you could be ridiculed, that you could be cheated and robbed, that you could be beaten and abused. Like these are very real potentialities for people in this day and age, and I'm sure there would have been in previous times as well. But yeah, and so with a pessimistic outlook, you are tuning yourself to try and look at what these dangers are on the horizon, so that maybe you can avoid them. There's other aspects as well. Sometimes the usefulness of pessimism is if you prepare yourself for the worst case scenario, then if it doesn't turn out quite as bad as what you imagined, you feel a little bit better.
Yes, but what if, and most of the time that is the case, that the worst case scenario never happens? In fact, whatever happens in reality is far from the worst case scenario imagined by ourselves.
In that case, you felt negative for very little value, very little purpose. Although you still get all the you potentially get the pleasure. Pleasure's maybe the wrong word, but you get to experience moving from that pessimistic belief into this reality of here it is now. It's difficult because I'm having this argument, but then all these people are popping in my mind from watching TV, like Victor Meldrew. Do you ever see him? A really pessimistic old man. But there's all these characters who are direly pessimistic, and I've got to be honest. And when I replay the tape in my head of the books I've read and the things I've watched on TV and videos, the pessimistic character is like, it's never good. He's never a winner. He's always a loser. And so I find myself probably being tainted by that. And there's maybe a truth there, but given that my job is currently to defend pessimism, it's not that helpful to me right now. So yeah.
Yeah, I think that you should think about it really carefully. You know, when you are living in perpetuate state of fear, of anticipating the worst case scenario, you're not enjoying your life. You're always worrying about something that's just behind the corner. You're trying to use your memories of past experiences to conjure all these things that can happen, but that's having a direct impact on the stress levels that you have in your life.
Absolutely, but that's what I'm proposing, is that the pessimism is an alternative to living like that. So instead of living in that state of fear and anxiety, because you're imagining a worst case scenario, it's a form of control. It's giving you that locus of control, which then improves your current state of situation. Maybe you find it hard to connect with that.
At what cost?
Well, sometimes you don't have a choice. Like, it's all very well if you're popular and you've got everything going for you. It's much easier to be optimistic because but if optimism's not an option for you, then
you have to work on it. Because it sounds to me like you say that these people who are successful and positive, it just happened to them because of pure luck. But
no,
I would argue that for many people, the reason why they found themselves in that particular situation is because of all the hard work they've done over the years that led them to that current moment. And very often, the most successful people, if you look at the history, they're usually the most positive ones. And I think that should be a very important takeaway from our today's discussion, that if you want to become successful, and I don't mean successful financially, because there are different definitions of success. For me, being successful is to do things that I love and I enjoy. Yes, it would be great if one day I could become financially independent. I can't wait for that day. But this wouldn't necessarily fulfill me as much as having a purpose in my life, as having some really deep goal, like this channel, for instance. My idea behind it is to help as many people as possible to try to realize that there is a way forward, regardless of at what stage of life you are right now, and regardless of how bad it is. It is possible to change, and it takes time. It takes lots of education, but I think that there's a light at the end of the tunnel for everyone. Not only for the people who are gifted with the good genes, that are not predisposed to depression. And I think that, yes, technically you could start from this negative mindset, and if you start being extremely cautious about your future, you can start implementing ways to prevent that worst case scenario. But after some time, you have to realize, okay, right now I've got this backup plan of a backup plan of a backup plan. It's time for me to start living.
I don't disagree with you that a better place to be is in a place of optimism. It's just, how do you get there? And for some people, so when you look at the people, you're saying that it's a given that everybody who is optimistic is a succeeder and everybody's pessimistic isn't. And I don't think that's necessarily true. I think there's lots of people and lots of examples of highly successful people in life who started off very pessimistic because that's what was on the horizon. Things change. What changes? Why an optimistic person? How did they become optimistic? Now you're saying, I think you're a bit repelled by what you think I'm saying about, they've got a silver spoon. They were just given that. And fair enough, I'm not saying there wasn't hard work on their part, but if you look at them and you analyse how did they become that, I think you've got different things. One is they've got investment. They've got investment from somebody else who's given them good quality stuff, somebody that cares for them and supports them, and that's absolutely fantastic. I think sometimes the pessimistic ones might not have that, or might not have such a high quality of that. There's another thing. There's another really important aspect, and that is autonomy. You need to have the autonomy to be able to change and become more optimistic and move from that place of optimism. And I think that's the difference. There's a lot of people who start off in a more pessimistic mindset, and they can make it into become having more optimism, but they need to have an area of their life where they're allowed to have more autonomy, more control over themselves and change. And that's where I think it's a really useful place when somebody's in that place to begin to develop a more optimistic and hopeful and a brighter, sunnier outlook on the world around about them and about themselves and their circumstances. I mean, there's other people with there's different levels of it where you have power and control in your life.
Isn't that what I've said? They can start off with negativity, as long as you'll make sure once you have all these backup plans to prepare you for the worst case scenario, to start shifting your mindset at that point. The problem is that I absolutely agree with you. The problem is that people are stuck in these negative and pessimistic ways. It's because the way they program themselves, over the years of their life. It's not like, I'm going to do the backup plan of a backup plan of a backup plan, and suddenly I'm going to become positive. No, it doesn't work like that way. Most likely, if this is who you are, you're going to have to work really, really hard to change it. Because regardless of how many backup plans you're going to have, you'll most likely think, okay, but there's always something worse that can happen. And I have to prepare for that. And many people are wasting so much of their life for preparing, for these worst case scenarios, setting up all these, trust funds, so on and so forth, just to have this backup plan of a backup plan. And then they hit 50s and 60s and they get a heart attack or something like that. They die. They have all this, security, all this extra money in the bank, but they haven't really lived their life. They haven't enjoyed their life.
Yeah, I get what you're saying. So you're talking about something slightly different as I see it. And it's about, it's like an ancient thing that's been wrestled with. And it's, do you plan and save, or do you just live life for now and just enjoy your life now? Was it YOLO, the young people say? You only live once. And there's two kind of contrasting things there, and often the older saying, yeah, think about your future, think about the future, and the younger like, well, enjoy your life now. And they're both genuine, they both have big risks.
Yes.
It's like,
balance.
You're not taking any of that investment and money with you. It's like when you die, somebody else is going to spend that. So like, enjoy your time now and live life. On the other hand, you live free and easy and you don't plan for the future. So there's dangers to both those things. And I guess I'm saying with the pessimism and optimism, there's also dangers with both of those things. They're not like it, but the picture that's always painted is like, oh yeah, just be more optimistic. What's wrong with you, sad sack? It's like society really pushes that message, like there's a problem with you. And what silly. I'm saying is it's a little bit more complicated.
Of course.
And maybe you were saying that, yeah, I see what you're saying. You're saying backup plans, but what I guess I'm trying to reflect what might be somebody's situation and how the nurture, because I don't know about the genetics, like maybe that does cause you to be more pessimistic.
Apparently that's what the scientists are saying, but science is changing all the time, so we don't know for certain.
The problem is that they're dealing with the brain and they don't know as much as they'd like to think about the brain. If they're being completely honest, it's a very complicated, like we're the most complicated things that you're going to find on this planet. So yeah, how that comes to be and why, I guess I'm trying to understand why somebody might be more pessimistic or more inclined towards that pessimism. And it's easy, like there's obviously not things which cause that to be the case that are not genetic. It's not, the upper classes like to think, oh yes, we are very intellectual and it's our genetics, very good genes, and those stupid lower class people, and it's like, well, there's maybe... Yeah, it's not quite as simple a picture as that. There's all sorts of things that play into that model.
You're right. And just to be clear, this is not the message I try to propagate. That, just stay positive, everything's going to work out fine. No. You should stay positive, but you should also carefully consider what is it that you want out of your life. And I'm not saying just stay positive and everything's going to be just fine. You'll see. No. Hard work. You can be positive, but you cannot be delusional. You have to think about all these other aspects, but changing the way you look at it. Trying to find the things that you enjoy, something that you're really good at, and try to turn it into a business, for instance. So that's a way better and productive way of spending your time and enjoying your life. And at the same time, creating that backup plan. Rather than, being petrified, it's horrible unless, I'm going to get that degree, unless I'm going to get that qualification, I'm not going to be able to survive. And then it's a drudgery. It's, when it comes to preparation for all these exams, for all this schooling that you're not going to enjoy. And yes, on one hand, it's giving you security, but it's killing you. Step by step, very slowly, because you're not enjoying that process at all. Many of us are just trying to pursue the wrong things. And what I mean is that you're in a profession that you hate. Every single year you become more and more miserable. Yes, on the face of it, you've got, more qualifications and you're not as easily expendable as you would be without it. But living a life that you hate, because honestly, this is the life that you absolutely dread every single morning. But for some reason, people just decide, yes, but this is a security and I'm willing to put up with this to have that security.
To speak to that, it's the meaning that you apply. So you're an adult maybe in that circumstances where you've got that job and you've studied for that, maybe architecture. Maybe you spent all those years, 7 years at uni to become an architect, and you've been working in that job for 13 years and you find it really boring and really dull and it wasn't what you thought it would be, but it pays your bills, it's giving you money for supporting your family. So, but what's the meaning? So you could say, such a shame for that person. They should just give that up and do something else. And in a way, maybe there's not a hard and fast answer. It depends person to person. It's like, what is the other meaning attached to that? So is it providing the other, like if it's really important to them to provide for their family and it's allowing them to support something else which has great meaning for them, then maybe the best thing is for them to just carry on doing that, get their head down. Like, I guess it's a balance between the individual and how they work for those and serve those who are important to them.
one of the things that I can see all around, and I see it over and over when it comes to people who think about their life that way, the way you just explained, is that they're telling themselves that I'm going to have to work really hard now, but, eventually, in 10, 15 years, I'll be able to do whatever I want. But very often, in 15 years, they still do that thing, and in their mind, they've got the same narrative. In another 10, 15 years, I'm going to be there. I'm going to reach my retirement, and I'm going to go live on Bahamas. I'm going to be playing golf every day. And the reality is, there's a high chance that you will get hit by a car tomorrow, you'll die. And finding a balance is a key. And living in the life, yes, this is my profession, I'm still going to save this money, and this end goal it always shifts. It always changes, and
I would agree that's a potential pitfall. But it sounds like you've been a bit pessimistic about that, Mariusz. It does, doesn't it? That is, like you're saying, this is how these people look. This is their outlook, and you're probably right. That probably is the case. And a lot of the people who are pushing optimism on YouTube with their different things, they're utilising that logical argument to try and convince people that they're right. And it's like, well, fair enough, it's reasonable to do, but it's not it doesn't reflect the whole picture.
Of course, hard work, you can't replace hard work with any optimism or pessimism. For you to achieve any sort of success, you have to put a hard work, and you have to do this hard work every single day, probably for the rest of your life. Because it's not something that just happens to you. It's something that you create. So the fact that I'm feeling so positive most of my life is because I do things in my life that are leading me to the ultimate goal. And my ultimate goal is to be a happy and successful person. And yes, there are certain things that I have to do in my life to get to that end goal. And these things are not perhaps the most pleasurable things to do, including, some of my jobs. I wish I could just do this thing for a living and just research 5-6 hours every single day, write some articles. But at this very moment is not very realistic. So even though I'm super positive, I'm not suddenly giving up all my jobs. Mm-hmm. And, yes, this is what I want to do. I'm just going to stay positive and everything's going to work out fine. No. And this is the message. This is the main takeaway that I want everyone to understand. Being positive doesn't mean that you stop working hard and you just hope for the best. There's this law of attraction and suddenly you're going to start attracting all the positive things to you. No, it doesn't happen like that. There's no happiness without hard work. Yes, sometimes you can be lucky. You can have wealthy parents and you will inherit everything, which is absolutely great. But for most of us, unfortunately, you probably don't have a wealthy parents, and everything that you've got in your life is because of the choices that you've made in the past. Yeah,
and I think we've got a place of agreement there. I think what you need to cultivate that more optimistic outlook is some autonomy, and you get a bit more of that as you get a bit older. And maybe you can push the boundaries of that a bit as well to try and create a bit more of yourself, and it'd be great for us to explore that and see where we've maybe done that in our lives and where other people could do that. So yeah, we've got to be mindful as well of the amount of autonomy that we have. Like you're saying, the choices you make, and it's correct when you say that, it's the hard work you did. However, there is an aspect where you can only work hard and get those results in a system that provides that and allows those grooves, because you follow a groove in your life. You go to an education system. There's the opportunities that are open to you within the structure that you live within, the community.
We're absolutely right.
We are. We have huge opportunities for that autonomy. And that's something to be optimistic about. It's also something to be slightly pessimistic about, because you want to protect that and you want to make sure that you have that freedom, that freedom exists for other people. And that's a complicated one. And it's always one that people are, whatever time you live in, it's always one that people are focused on. And they're like, how do we make sure that there's a good system in place for us and for those after us and for community? A really important thing.
But that's the part of the problem for me, is that these days people are ungrateful. people don't realize, they've got no gratitude in them whatsoever. They, especially here in the UK, people don't realize what a beautiful country that we'll live in. This is a country of opportunities. Everyone can achieve anything practically, if you put your mind into it. There are people in other countries who are not as lucky as we are, who don't get these opportunities, who don't have access to NHS, to all these wonderful things that we have access to here. People have to realize that regardless of how negative you are today, if you look around and if you see the amount of possibilities available for us, for anyone these days, it's staggering. And I think having a goal is one of the biggest things that has a huge impact on your positive mindset. If you have something to strive for, if you have a project of some sort, it's really difficult to think about this negativity, all the worst case scenarios. You're trying to focus on the best possible outcome, and once you have that in your life, I think that at that point everything changes, and that has a tremendous impact on the level of happiness that you sustain on a daily basis. And
I agree with you completely. I think there's a line from the Bible that says, without a vision, the people perish. And I think that's true on a psychological level for human individuals. If you don't have a goal, if you don't have a purpose, a meaning to your existence and to your life, then it's downhill. And that's a negative aspect that's just purely bad. There's nothing good about that. That isn't just like, you could still be pessimistic, but that's one of the big pitfalls. If you lose meaning and you don't have a goal, then that's a big slope that just goes downhill.
And we have to be honest about the situation. Yes, although most of the time I'm positive, there's a loads of reasons for me to be negative, and I think about these reasons every single day. I just don't allow them to hijack my mind and to think that the whole world is bad and we're all gonna die, for instance. No, I'm trying to see the light at the end of the tunnel. And being positive, it doesn't mean that you completely ignore anything that's negative in the world. It's about trying to find out the way you explain things to yourself, and that will definitely help your mental health. So it's not something that happens overnight. You have to work on it daily. And it's like with the garden of our mind. If you don't attend your garden on a daily basis, the weeds are going to start growing. And if you leave it for too long, it's going to be impossible to fix it, or it's going to take very, very long time. And, some professional tools to get back to some normality. So I think that's the takeaway of today's discussion. So have a vision, work hard, and stay positive.
Yeah, enjoy your autonomy while you have it.
Okay, thank you so much for watching. Again, if you find it useful, please hit the like and consider subscribing. And we'll see you again next week. Thanks.